Please subscribe, like and share this content. It means a lot to us. Thank you in advance. Cornell Law School. U.C.C. Article 2A, Leases, Part 5. Default. See Default by LESSEE. Paragraph 2A-528. Lessor's damages for non-acceptance, failure to pay, repudiation, or other default. 1. Except as otherwise provided with respect to damages liquidated in the lease agreement, Section 2A-504, or otherwise determined pursuant to agreement of the parties, Sections 102, 3, and 2A-503, if a lessor elects to retain the goods or lessor elects to dispose of the goods and the disposition is by lease agreement that for any reason does not qualify for treatment under Section 2A-527, 2, or is by sale or otherwise, the lessor may recover from the lessee as damages for a default of the type described in Section 2A-523, 1, or 2A-523, 3a, or, if agreed, for other default of the lessee, i. accrued and unpaid rent as of the date of default if the lessee has never taken possession of the goods, or, if the lessee has taken possession of the goods, as of the date the lessor repossesses the goods or an earlier date on which the lessee makes a tender of the goods to the lessor. 2. The present value as of the date determined under Clause I of the total rent for the then remaining lease term of the original lease agreement minus the present value as of the same date of the market rent at the place where the goods are located computed for the same lease term. And 3. Any incidental damages allowed under Section 2A-530, less expenses saved in consequence of the lessee's default. 2. If the measure of damages provided in subsection 1 is inadequate to put a lessor in as good a position as performance would have, the measure of damages is the present value of the profit, including reasonable overhead, the lessor would have made from full performance by the lessee, together with any incidental damages allowed under Section 2A-530, due allowance for costs reasonably incurred and due credit for payments or proceeds of disposition. Paragraph 2A-529. Lessor's action for the rent. 1. After default by the lessee under the lease contract of the type described in Section 2A-523, 1, or 2A-523, 3a, or, if agreed, after other default by the lessee, if the lessor complies with subsection 2, the lessor may recover from the lessee as damages, a. for goods accepted by the lessee and not repossessed by or tendered to the lessor, and for conforming goods lost or damaged within a commercially reasonable time after risk of loss passes to the lessee. Section 2A-219, I. Accrued and unpaid rent as of the date of entry of judgment in favor of the lessor. 2. The present value as of the same date of the rent for the then remaining lease term of the lease agreement. And 3. Any incidental damages allowed under Section 2A-530, less expenses saved in consequence of the lessee's default. And b. For goods identified to the lease contract if the lessor is unable after reasonable effort to dispose of them at a reasonable price or the circumstances reasonably indicate that effort will be unavailing, i. accrued and unpaid rent as of the date of entry of judgment in favor of the lessor. 2. The present value as of the same date of the rent for the then remaining lease term of the lease agreement. And 3. Any incidental damages allowed under Section 2A-530, less expenses saved in consequence of the lessee's default. 2. Except as provided in subsection 3, the lessor shall hold for the lessee for the remaining lease term of the lease agreement any goods that have been identified to the lease contract and are in the lessor's control. 3. The lessor may dispose of the goods at any time before collection of the judgment for damages obtained pursuant to subsection 1. If the disposition is before the end of the remaining lease term of the lease agreement, the lessor's recovery against the lessee for damages is governed by Section 2A-527 or Section 2A-528. and the lessor will cause an appropriate credit to be provided against a judgment for damages to the extent that the amount of the judgment exceeds the recovery available pursuant to Section 2A-527 or 2A-528. 4. Payment of the judgment for damages obtained pursuant to subsection 1 entitles the lessee to the use and possession of the goods not then disposed of for the remaining lease term of and in accordance with the lease agreement. 5. After default by the lessee under the lease contract of the type described in section 2A-523, 1 or section 2A-523, 3A or, if agreed, after other default by the lessee, the lessor who is held not entitled to a rent under this section must nevertheless be awarded damages for non-acceptance under section 2A-527 or section 2A-528. Paragraph 2A-530. Lessor's incidental damages. Incidental damages to an aggrieved lessor include any commercially reasonable charges, expenses, or commissions incurred in stopping delivery, in the transportation, care and custody of goods after the lessee's default, in connection with return or disposition of the goods, or otherwise resulting from the default. Paragraph 2A-531. Standing to sue third parties for injury to goods. 1. If a third party so deals with goods that have been identified to a lease contract as to cause actionable injury to a party to the lease contract, A. The lessor has a right of action against the third party, and B. The lessee also has a right of action against the third party if the lessee, I. has a security interest in the goods, 2. has an insurable interest in the goods, or 3. bears the risk of loss under the lease contract or has since the injury assumed that risk as against the lessor and the goods have been converted or destroyed. 2. If at the time of the injury the party plaintiff did not bear the risk of loss as against the other party to the lease contract and there is no arrangement between them for disposition of the recovery, his or her suit or settlement, subject to his or her own interest, is as a fiduciary for the other party to the lease contract. 3. Either party with the consent of the other may sue for the benefit of whom it may concern. Paragraph 2A-532. Lessor's rights to residual interest. In addition to any other recovery permitted by this article or other law, the lessor may recover from the lessee an amount that will fully compensate the lessor for any loss of or damage to the lessor's residual interest in the goods caused by the default of the lessee.